Good morning. If I were giving this message in Samarkand in Uzbekistan, this is what I would wear. For a person with my background, my education, and my religion, I would wear this robe. So I'm wearing it today. I can tell you that one of the most meaningful moments in my whole life was in Uzbekistan. Of course, not more than the day we got married. My wife Tricia is here. Nor the day that we met, nor the day that our 3 daughters were born, nor the day that I met Dr. Curry. Okay, I'll stop there. But it was actually quite memorable. And what happened is that Tricia and I were with a group of people that were being trained in church planting, and it went on many hours. And at the end, they asked me, would you give a 45-minute talk on the history of Christianity in Central Asia? Now, I didn't have any notes or anything with me. I had done it before, so I just had to do it extemporaneously. And it occurred to me as I was starting it that the people I was talking to, their ancestors, had actually been Christians 600 years before my people. And so I recounted this early story, and then I said, by the way, my people came along. I'm Scandinavian. So I said, my people came along and they killed everybody. But except for some women and some monks that made really good slaves who they took back to Scandinavia, and it took decades to win these violent people over to the gospel. We've learned a lot now over several hundred years, and so we've made some contributions to the world. But I ended with the idea, am I really a typical Christian, or are you a typical Christian? Because your history is much longer than mine, and trying to kind of recalibrate this story a little bit. And I felt like this is really a key to the future. This is part of a path to all peoples. So if you can answer that question, you're probably making your way along this path. So there's no more significant biblical theme in my life than God's deep love for all the peoples of the world. From creation to the Abrahamic covenant, to the promises to Israel, to the Psalms, to the visions of the prophets, to the Magnificat, to the exclamation of Simeon, to the Great Commission, to Peter and Cornelius, to the council in Jerusalem, to Paul's mission to the Gentiles, and finally, to the revelation of John. One encounters a heavenly vision of all the peoples of the world blessed by God, blessed by the gospel. And in concert with several others who have spoken in chapel this semester, I want to deeply affirm that Revelation 7:9 vision of our community. But as a central passage today, I've chosen Psalm 67, which you heard in Mandarin, to frame this amazing love for all peoples. And I'll read it to you in English now just to get started. May God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine on us, so that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations. May the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule over the peoples with equity and guide the nations of the earth. May the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. The land yields its harvest. God, our God, blesses us. May God bless us still, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him. Okay, this global vision for humanity is put beautifully by a Chinese house church pastor that I was able to interact with before he was put in prison. And he said this. He said, if your master is the master of the whole universe, then the whole universe is related to your life's meaning. The whole universe is your sphere of operation. Although you live, move, and exist in only one corner of the universe, unless every part is meaningful, your corner can never be meaningful. Colossians 1 says that Christ created all things, holds all things together, and is the head of the body, his church. Now, I have the privilege of studying the global gospel every single day, producing reference works on where the gospel is, where it isn't around the world. I co-direct the Center for the Study of Global Christianity with Dr. Gina Zerlo. We're an academic research center that monitors worldwide demographic trends in Christianity. We collect detailed information on Christian history, outreach, mission in every single country of the world. Now, my youngest daughter has captured this in a different way. Her friends ask her, "What does your dad do?" She replies, "He's a religious demographer." They ask, "What's that?" And she says, "He writes large books full of numbers that no one can understand." So with that in mind, I want to share with you today some numerical findings that are most relevant to the topic of gospel access for all peoples, and I do hope you understand. Okay. I've been grateful, by the way, for the different ways that we get to live out our global reality right here at Gordon-Conwell and at our other campuses. I've got my students in my classes, the students at the center, my fellow faculty members, staff and administration, the discipleship experience, Roselle scholars. In every case, I have daily interaction with Christians from all around the world. This diversity will be increasingly normal for our pastors, our churches, and our Christian ministries. Michelle Williams, our former Dean of Students, in her excellent book, Diversity Playbook, shows convincingly that diversity is good for our organizations. It's good for humanity because the scriptures are so clear that we're to love our neighbor and welcome the stranger, and it is good for the body of Christ because it honors the image of God in all of us. Now, as we contemplate the universal scope of Psalm 67, it would be natural for us to ask, is the gospel present today among all the world's peoples? Put simply, the answer is no. There are about 4,000 peoples out of 13,000 that have little or no access to the gospel. About 30% of the world's population has no access. The good news is that in 1970, about 45% had no access. We've made good progress. But our projections for 2050 show a world in which still 30% have no access. Why is this? Two probable reasons are first, that Christianity is still perceived as a Western religion, and second, the peoples farthest from the gospel tend to have large families. I will focus on the first of these today and briefly mention a couple of other areas of concern that keep us from experiencing this Psalm 67 vision. So these are probably familiar to you. Christians of all kinds have been about a third of the world's population for the last 120 years. But that's not the whole story, because in 1900, 82% of all Christians lived in the global north, which is Europe and North America. During the 20th century, Christian affiliation decreased in the north and increased in the global south, which is Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania. So by the time we get to today, 33% of all Christians in the world are from the global north. So we've seen a complete switch in the demographics of Christianity. For evangelicals, it's even more pronounced. Went from 92% in the global north in 1900, and this fell to just 23% by 2020. By 2050, 82% of all evangelicals will be in the global south. And Pentecostals are even more in the global south, 86% today, headed to 89% by 2050. And Pentecostals then, in one sense, are the most well-placed for mission to those currently without the gospel. So, with Psalm 67 in mind, we might ask ourselves, how does this shift of Christians to the global south impact gospel access for all peoples? Now, first, superficially, it means that there are more Global South Christians to recruit for Global North plans to evangelize the world. This indeed has been the case for many organizations in the last 40 years or so. In technical terms, we could call this an international approach where the resources and authority reside in the North and the activities take place all around the world. But at a deeper level, Christians in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania are creating their own agencies and plans. The Global North should embrace these initiatives from the Global South. In this case, we are looking at what could be called a global approach, where there is no one center, but many cultural expressions with equal authority. This is what it's called the polycentric approach, which is the way forward in global Christianity. Allow me to illustrate this a little further. I was at an evangelical conference in Wittenberg, Germany in 2017 to celebrate 500 years of the Protestant Reformation. I presented our research showing that in 2017, 40% of all Protestants were Africans. Out of the 100 people meeting there, there were just a few Africans. In fact, I was sitting next to a leader from Ghana when someone from the stage said, "Africans are welcome at the table in this evangelical movement." My colleague leaned over to me and quietly recounted a Ghanaian proverb. "It is good if you invite me to the table, but it is far better if you invite me into the kitchen." Why are Christians from the Global South invited to a Global North table when they should be found with everybody else in the kitchen? And why, in light of the equality of peoples in Psalm 67, are Black, Indigenous, and people of color invited to a Western table? Jochebed Miseles, who's an indigenous Gundele from Panama, gives us a clue when she writes this: "God was here in Panama before the Europeans. For this reason, the question is not what can the church do for indigenous peoples, but rather what must the church learn from indigenous peoples?" This question reflects the heart of Jesus Christ. That's what she said. And I'll say it reflects the destination of Psalm 67. Since all peoples praise him, why not listen to all peoples? Let's listen to some of those voices from our 10-volume series that we're doing in the Global Christianity series. I'll just do a couple of these. First of all, we're just about to publish Volume 6, which is Christianity in the Latin America and Caribbean, which we're hoping will come out in Spanish simultaneous with the English version and Portuguese as well. So here's what Roderick Hewitt, who's from the Caribbean, writes in this volume. "The Anglo-Caribbean experience of Christianity has for centuries been an appendage of the dominant British and later American Christian traditions. Authentic indigenization and enculturation of Christianity within the Anglo-Caribbean will be a slow and difficult process because of the profound impact of overbearing British and American cultural influences." Unquote. This is really interesting in light of the royal visit of William and Kate to the region this last week and the mixed reception they received. They were happy to see him, but they had some things to say about their own independence. In essence, I think the peoples of the Caribbean are aligning themselves with Psalm 67 and the dignity that they deserve in the aftermath of their colonial past. Let's go to Peter Phan in Christianity in East and Southeast Asia, writing on Vietnam. Here he says this: "Christianity was, and is to a certain extent, still is, perceived as a Western religion that has colluded with Western colonialism and is associated with foreign powers. The Catholic Church is seen identical to the Vatican State, whereas the Protestant churches are perceived as being in collusion with the United States. No doubt the colonialist legacy remains a heavy and scandalous baggage for Vietnamese Christians. which they must honestly acknowledge, even if Christian missions historically have made and continue to make significant contributions to their countries, especially in the fields of education, healthcare, and social welfare. This, unquote, this sounds like the need for deeper cultural contextualization to match the Psalm 67 vision. Okay, these kinds of examples all underline the fact that many Christians around the world are still grappling with how to free themselves from a northern or western form of Christianity. At issue here is not anything fundamentally wrong with Western Christianity. Instead, it is its preeminence that is the problem. Western Christianity, as we know here, has a wealth of treasures to offer the global church. I love and cherish so much of my own Western heritage, but it is a contextual form of Christianity, or many contextual forms of Christianity, and it is certainly not the standard by which all the others should be measured. Western culture itself needs to be acknowledged as a lens through which the gospel is refracted, and then it needs to be decentered in order for us to be global, equally representing the various cultural perspectives of the Christian faith. One of my favorite books this past year was of a Hmong refugee, Kao Kalia Yang's book. It's called Somewhere in the Unknown World, a collection of 15 stories of refugees who settled in the Twin Cities, my hometown. The stories are heartwarming, but they're also devastating in the resistance that refugees face in resettling in American society. This book ends with a quote from the former head of Arrive Ministries, which is a Christian ministry to refugees. And the former head says this, she asks this: how do we let people have their own voices in a system that's designed against their stories? Now, fortunately for us, the scriptures, including Psalm 67, value the voices of all peoples. Their stories and their songs are precious in God's sight. We know this because Psalm 67 favors indigenous expressions of worship among all peoples. Verses 3 and 5 read, "May the peoples praise you, may all the peoples praise you." Now, with this in mind, we might paraphrase J.I. Packer, who we heard earlier from our dean, at the end of every session, or maybe the beginning, beginning or the end. No, it's beginning, and they sang the doxology. So here I'm going to paraphrase him, just to put this in context. The purpose of theology, all of which is contextual, is ethnodoxology, the worship of Jesus by all of the peoples of the world. And on that note, I'd like to offer a special thanks to Grace Lee and the worship team, the chapel team, every person who's participated in chapel today, because you've given us a glimpse of Psalm 67 this morning. Now, I'd like to briefly address a couple other issues, maybe just one issue I'll just do, related to a path for all peoples. First, in compiling the World Christian Encyclopedia, we saw how women play a vital role in churches around the world, ranging from ordained pastoral leadership to healthcare education. The American missionary movement was majority female in the 19th and 20th centuries, and female missionaries often performed all the tasks of their male counterparts. It's estimated that the majority of missionaries today and those who actively support them are women. In short, there's no path to all peoples without the contribution of women. Dr. Zerlo, co-director of our center, is finishing a very important book offering compelling evidence for the central role women play in all aspects of world Christianity. Now, there's strong evidence that in the COVID pandemic, women have better navigated the crisis than men. Now, some people believe, women leaders that is, some believe that this is because societies that are comfortable electing women to top positions are also more likely to listen to varying points of view. Yet despite this reality, the vast majority of leaders in evangelical mission are men. Understanding the global Christian context means overcoming this limitation and favoring the voices of women to truly represent what's happening in our communities. And as an example of this, Tricia and I have 3 wonderful daughters, and as a family, we now have an infamous story related to me, unfortunately. And that is several years ago, when I got my first smartphone, I had a weather app on it, and we went to a local restaurant, and I was tinkering with my weather app, and I suddenly exclaimed to my family sitting there, I was looking at it, I said, "Girls, there might be a big storm coming." And in unison, these 3 girls said, "Dad, look out the window." So I looked out the window, and there were sheets of rain coming down. The trees were practically bent to the ground, and it made me embarrassed to think I was staring at my phone that whole time. Maybe it's time for men worldwide to stop peering into their devices, take directions from women, and look out the window to see what God is already up to in a Psalm 67 world. Now, women of color are especially important when we consider gospel access for all peoples. The path to all peoples runs through young women of color in the global South. But a black female colleague of mine was asked by a white male student, "Does it make black people uncomfortable that God is a white man?" That student was expressing a historical and cultural myopic view well out of step with the scriptures. We are all made in God's image. He's not made in our image. Perhaps we should ask that young man, does it make you uncomfortable that God is the Lord of all peoples? In fact, his perspective, shared by many, is a major obstacle to the Psalm 67 world. Okay, a couple of other things I'll just mention briefly. A majority of Christian outreach goes to reaching other Christians. Thus, it's not surprising to learn that there's a severe relationship gap between Christians and non-Christians. An estimated 87% of Buddhists, Hindus, and Muslims do not personally know a Christian. And there's no way we're going to get to all peoples without personal relationship with people in other religions. Next, we have integral or holistic mission. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the Lausanne Congress of 1974, when Billy Graham invited evangelicals from around the world to consider world evangelization. And 2 streams flowed from that meeting. First, a call to address peoples who've never heard the gospel. And second, a call to social action and justice. And social concern recognizes the inherent value of all humanity based on the concept of all created in the image of God. Doing justice is multidimensional, holistic, it's pervasive in scriptures, and our friends from Latin America in particular said these belong together. One famously said these are like 2 wings of a plane. And I don't think we'll get to a gospel for all peoples without that. Wherever the gospel goes, there is hope for equity and justice. The biblical view of justice is global. It's for all peoples. The global gospel call is not for mere representation of all peoples, but for biblical justice for all peoples. And by the way, people of any color do best in a world where all peoples are equal. Psalm 67:4 reinforces this idea. May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule the peoples with equity and guide the nations of the earth. Okay, so in conclusion, Psalm 67 is clear that the gospel access is for all peoples. But Christianity has become over-identified with Western culture, while most missionary work is not done among the peoples farthest from the gospel. In addition, peoples without gospel access have some of the highest fertility rates in the world. The future of missions should reflect the shift of Christianity to the global south It should favor Christians who interact well with people in other religions. It should emphasize friendship and hospitality, take directions from women in decision-making, capture the social dimensions of mission, hold up models of contextualization, and embrace a truly global practice of leadership. When these are put together, the goal of reaching all peoples could be in sight. We will see that the more diverse Christianity is, the more likely new peoples will want to join. And we know that non-Christians should encounter the Jesus of all peoples. Only this global approach will lead us into the future so clearly shown in the scriptures, where all peoples worship in their own languages. That is a future that we can embrace together, and a path to all peoples that arrives safely at a Psalm 67 world. Thank you.